Hi, this is our presentation for Aliceo Incorporated, the Incident Brief, brought to you by Patrick Berker, Adrian Miranda, Lauren Shoemaker, and Rowan Sharma. This is our agenda.
Some background on Aliceo Inc., which is a consumer credit rating agency that's headquartered in Baltimore. They also have offices in DC, New York, San Francisco, London, Toronto, Hong Kong, and Buenos Aires. So those offices are strategically placed to give a global reach for the business, which has 5 lines of business, including the consumer services sector, which holds the compliant resolution group that ends up becoming very important in our story here. Aliceo has over 10,000 employees, but only 20 full-time cybersecurity employees, 15 of which are based in the Special Operations Center in the SOC in Baltimore. They've got 3 in London, 1 in Toronto, and in Hong Kong. They do outsource to a third-party vendor things like identity and access management, data loss prevention, and crisis management, which becomes very important here because in the event of a breach, they would take over. So that's reconnaissance. That's what the group's called that they outsource to. Aliceo is at the beginning of this story falling under the U.S. CERT's mandate for a patch coming out for rhododendron for all 5 lines of business. The patch is used in all 5 lines of business. Rhododendron is a framework that's used by Aliceo, and a security patch is put forward by the U.S. CERT, which is a division within DHS, to patch this security breach because there's a vulnerability here that they've identified, but through a series of unfortunate events and misorganization and incorrect reporting lines, the compliant resolutions group does not patch this vulnerability within rhododendron, and then that becomes exploited and leads to attackers being able to extract PII personal data of what's estimated at the beginning of 400 million Aliceo customers, and that includes social security numbers and bank account numbers. So that's your background before we get into the timeline here.
Over the past 2 months and through the current day, Aliceo Inc. has identified a data breach and has begun to take the necessary steps to remediate this situation. A robust timeline of the rhododendron data breach events are as follows. 8 weeks ago, an employee in Buenos Aires was the victim of a phishing email, which compromised his login credentials. 7 weeks ago, an unknown hacker or hackers utilized the employee's credentials and entered into a charity fundraiser website, which stored the credentials of other Aliceo Inc.'s employees. 6 weeks ago, the hackers were able to access Aliceo Inc.'s customer service database. 5 weeks ago, after receiving an emergency vulnerability alert, the company informed required personnel for which all but 1 line of business did not comply with the patch. From 4 weeks ago to 1 week ago, the hackers began to export data from company networks. Lastly, within the last week, a third-party security contractor alerted Aliceo Inc. to the misuse of an employee's credentials. The credential access was removed. Upon identifying the internal alert, the hackers increased the speed of exporting data from company networks. The exporting was stopped 3 days ago. An investigation to determine its severity has begun.
As a result of this incident, we have assessed some potential and realized operational, reputational, and regulatory impacts that have or will affect our business. Operationally speaking, due to the compromise of the credentials for the Buenos Aires employees, our security team deemed it necessary to revoke their access. As a result, they will be unable to work until their access has been restored. Additionally, we can make an assumption that there will be a severe impact to the complaint resolution group and consumer services as a whole, since most of the data that was extracted was from their database. These operational impacts will certainly lead to a financial loss. However, we are still determining what the extent of that financial loss will be. Reputationally speaking, this breach will almost certainly affect the way our customers view our organization. They may feel that their data is not being sufficiently protected and will not want to do business with us. Finally, we will almost certainly be facing some regulatory impacts as a result of this breach under the General Data Protection Regulation. We are still assessing the specific timeline, but we may not have met the 72-hour reporting requirement under GDPR when this incident was confirmed. Additionally, regulators may find that our data was not sufficiently protected. These factors will most likely lead to fines being imposed against our organization. At this time, we do not have what the amount of that fine could be.
So where do we go from here? The first is we owe the mea culpa of apologies. We can't do, as they always say, not a husband or wife apology where you say, I'm sorry you feel this way. You have to give a genuine, I'm sorry, I apologize to our customers, to the community, to regulators for our mistakes. It is a mea culpa apology, no ifs, ands, or buts, no blaming it on anyone. This is an institutional issue. Second thing is you bring in an outside entity. This serves two major issues, and this is when I say an outside entity, I mean a cybersecurity expert company. They'll determine the exact parameters of the breach. We need to know how many people were impacted, what was the impact, what were the cascading effects, what vulnerability was exploited, so we can make sure something like this never happens again. More importantly, if we bring in the outside entity, it's a signal to the market that we understand the problem. That will underline the fact that we're taking this seriously. Third, we need a new legal team. We need to fire our in-house counsel and bring in a new set of lawyers to ensure we're back into regulatory compliance. We made errors. We tried to deceive regulators. We need to say that up front. And we need to make sure that our legal team can bring Aliceo Incorporated back into compliance. And there'll be other issues for the legal team that I'll discuss in a second. Finally, and probably the most painful, we need to assess costs. There are several costs up front, and this doesn't include the brand costs or the loss of stock market value. But 3 costs are to bring in a new cybersecurity firm to examine it. That's cost 1. Cost number 2 will be the undoubtedly government fines from regulators for our actions. And then finally, and probably the largest cost, will be a class action lawsuit. It would be easier to settle this as a class action instead of trying to deal legally with each individual claimant, but we would use a class action so we can understand the costs and settle that in or